All right, well, welcome to CC Colloquium for, it's our first colloquium in November, right? It's November 3rd, 2021. Welcome, everybody. We have like double the in-person attendance, which is awesome. And what's even more awesome is that we have an in-person speaker, so we're very, very pleased with that. Just to let you know, upcoming next week, we have a presentation from our very own Sumner Starfield. And then after that, we have 3 of our CC graduate students giving presentations, 2 of whom will be here live in person. So please, if you can, arrange your schedule to try to come here and be here in person. That would be great. I know the students will appreciate speaking in front of a more of a live audience. So with that, I'm going to turn today's introduction over to Professor Reno to introduce Professor Smythe.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I would like to just introduce Dr. Smythe. So Dr. Smythe is an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth, UMD. She holds a joint appointment between the Departments of American Indian Studies and Earth and Environmental Sciences. She was named the 2019 Professional of the Year by the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, ACES, for her interdisciplinary research in geoscience, native education, and policy. Wendy is also a friend and colleague who has helped me and during my transition from postdoc to faculty here at ASU. Our friendship began with Wendy inviting me to visit her community in Alaska. There, I was able to see the joy and respect that Wendy's community offered me and that I continue to see within Wendy's professional career and caring for her students. Please join me in welcoming Wendy to CC.
Thank you for that introduction. So I'm speaking today about the Indigenous Geoscience community creating capacity and safe spaces. But I want to start by speaking in my language, introducing myself to you formally. Hadalas, atuntason tigudalelagen, di hadas hatagen, sonatlas tastis onai hatayu di ijam, ist akas gustri alagen, di klingwai, takia igagen, stach loa no dekeon, Wendy Smythe yatsakit no dekeon, Donna Douglas di au ijam, Alec Ruth di chin di nano ijam, Sam Elsie di chin di nano ijam, Sanahut Kate di chin di nano ijam, Hikpa handalai stut ijam.
Hello, everyone, again. This is Daryl. I wanted to explain for Wendy what she just said, because as Wendy has also been, really engaged with her community, she shared with me that it would not be, culturally appropriate for her to explain this herself. So I will do the explanation. The translation would be, I am of the Haida people. I am Sang'athlana's fish egg clan of the Sculpin House Haida. I belong to the Eagle moiety. I am an observer of the world. My Haida name is Ka Skalua. My given name is Wendy Smythe. My mother is Donna Douglas. My grandparents are Alec and Ruth Douglas. My great-grandparents are Sam and Elsie. My great-great-grandparents are James and Annie. My great-great-great-grandparents are Chief Sanai and Kate. My people are from Heidelberg, Alaska.
So I want to talk to you today and remind you that when we talk about these things, we're in ceremony together. We're giving and receiving knowledge from one another. And I'm going to share my knowledge with you and my experiences with you with respect. And when you engage with me, I expect that same respect in return. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to open your mind and listen to my journey through academia and the journey that I've had and how I try to impact students' experiences in academia. So in the images here, this is my family, 3, 2, and 1 generations back. This is my mother and my sister. And I often look at this picture and think about what did they envision my life would be? This 13-year-old, awkward, big glasses, groovy haircut, unicorn rainbow shirt person never imagined the journey she would go on. My community is 350 people, so I never imagined I would occupy spaces that I occupy today. I never imagined I would be a cultural practitioner, an oceanographer and researcher, an environmental activist, and the biggest honor that I have is mentoring the youth in our community and from other Indigenous communities. As Daryl mentioned, I work across several different sectors. I started in geoscience, looking at groundwater ecosystems that are rich in iron and manganese, biomineralization, biogeochemical cycling, and felt this disconnect. And so I started translating, excuse me, the air's blowing right on me, translating that science into traditional knowledge systems. And how do I merge my two identities together? Over here, I'm a scientist. Over here, I'm a Haida woman. How do I become a whole person? And that was by merging these two knowledge systems together. So I've worked for 14 years in my tribal community with the youth, with the tribe, and creating science curriculum. And we'll talk briefly about that today. Oops, sorry. And then I also work in policy. I work with a lot of different federal agencies. I worked at NSF for a couple of years as a AAAS fellow and got some background on how funding agencies work. Tried to look at who's funded and why, and who is not funded and why, and how do we change that dynamic. But I need to start with where I began my journey in academia, with my connection to Earth and space exploration. I got my molecular microbiology degree at Portland State University and went over to the geology department and worked in the astrobiology lab. And we went to Yellowstone, we looked at silica mineralization and impacts and inferences on how can we look at microfossils and the process of fossilization. Can we translate that to what we're finding in meteorites and on other planets? Can we have a modern analog for these other systems? So this is a manganese oxidizing hot spring. And you see the mouse? Yes. So this smooth texture is silica. So a lot of hot springs in Yellowstone deposit silica. That's why it's white. You see all that white rock all over the place. This hot spring was no different until about 2002. There was an earthquake and the whole geochemistry of a region of the park changed. And it started depositing manganese. And so that manganese poisoned the cyanobacteria, killed them, they got fossilized, and then they started infilling the pore spaces. So this is manganese infilling. Also looking at other hot springs, how do we mineralize and how do we preserve the sheets of these microbial cells? Do they preserve differently than bacteria and archaea? As I progressed along, we obviously want to know who's there. So we started doing metagenomic analysis of who is occupying these spaces, what are they doing, how are they impacting geochemistry, are we finding them in the fossil microfossils that we're looking at. Started doing enrichments and culturing, and this is my baby right here, little loaf of bread. This is a hyperthermophilic manganese oxidizing archaea that I found in this hot spring. And so we're working right now to look at what proteins and enzymes are oxidizing manganese. But why does this matter? Well, anyone know what this is? ALH 84001, Martian meteorite, it's found in Antarctica. And when I was an undergrad, it was a hot debate whether this was a bacteria or not. That's false color SEM. And so the work I do looks at fossils, bacterial fossils, and how long are they preserved? And it depends on what type of environment that it's in, depends on what type of mineral that's depositing. Can we characterize that and look at another planetary body and say, yes, this is biological, or no, it's chemical? So that's what we want to try to do. And that's a huge gap, right? That also pulled me into doing deep ocean research off the coast of Hawaii at Luihi, looking at another groundwater ecosystem enriched in iron and manganese, and working in a cold spring system, groundwater system again, iron and manganese enriched, and looking what is the commonalities between these three diverse environments that are groundwater ecosystems, and what are the differences in the microbial communities there. The cold spring sites in Alaska and it's enriched in CO2 as well. So we want to look at this as a natural mesocosm for climate change as well. It's saturated in CO2. How is it impacting the coastline? It runs right into the ocean. So is it impacting clams, fish? What is it doing? At the bottom is a mural that's in San Francisco of some of this work of 4 women who work in climate science. This is a depiction of all of our work together in a mural. So, as I said, the Klingwai Klakia Igagen, I tied that into my introduction, my formal introduction, because I can't be 2 people. I am an observer of the world. That's how we say we're a Haida scientist. I am always a Haida scientist. I'm not a Haida here and a scientist here. We have to be able to merge our identities together. That's difficult to do sometimes. We are air, land, and water people. We are connected to our environment. It has beinghood. What we do to it, it does to us. In my community, 70 to 80% of our diet is off the land and water. So we have a very strong connection to our environment. So we know the impacts of what is happening with climate change, with environmental impacts, how that's impacting our community. So as a geoscientist, I work with our tribe to address some of these issues and to partner with them to help them address some of these issues. As a native scientist, I naturally went along the pathway of diversity in science education. So I like to say, this cedar log, it's a red cedar. If this is your problem, your question, or your hypothesis, what are you going to do with it? We know that diversity in science leads to innovation and productivity. It allows students and us to think critically. We can look at one environment, one problem with 2 different worldviews and address it in a different way. If we all see the same thing, we're not going to move forward. If we need to get from point A to B, and we all have the same answer, this cedar log is a fence, furniture, a house. We're going to stay at A. But if we make a canoe, we're going to go to B. So the cultural diversity allows us to see an issue, a problem, a hypothesis differently and answer it and be innovative and creative. But we also know the promise of education is very different than the reality for our Indigenous students. The promise of having an education, changing your community. We don't talk about the isolation. We don't talk about being the only one walking into a classroom. For the first time in our life, we're the only one. We're the only Native person there. That is a difficult thing to do. If you've never done that, if you've never been the only one, try to envision that or put yourself in a space where you are, so that you can understand how other people feel. The reality leads to lack of retention of students. We recruit, we don't retain. That is perpetuating historical traumas in our community. We know the other thing our students experience is the unspoken and unconscious idea that everyone has a right to use natives as they see fit, to use our identities as they see fit. And that's rationalized and justified as honoring us. Indigeneity is considered a national heritage. It is not. We own our identity, and we should be allowed to own our identity just like you own your identity. But our students go in, we go in as faculty, and we are introduced as a race first. This is our Native faculty. So now you're telling someone, I am there because I'm Native and not because of my scholarship. That is detrimental to our students. In the US, there's a mythology that provides a narrative to define who we are, what we look like, how we act. And it's institutionalized not only in the US, but globally, right? These narratives laid the foundation for how we are viewed. We're not real people. We're a hypersexualized Halloween costume. We're a mascot. We're face paint. We're savage. Our traditional knowledge systems are just myths, stories, and not real. Our students are walking into these spaces being told that's who we are. How are they going to succeed with that narrative? They're not. We have to change how we interact with one another. We have to treat each other like a human and try to understand somebody else has a different journey than us, and it's okay. We can learn from that. So if we consider the intersections of security for our student, looking at place, identity, and belonging. How do we bring our students into the field, sorry, and have a connection to place? When we do field research, and I talk about that mostly because that's what I do field research. If we don't look at the history of place, how are we going to do good science? The history of place influences our science and our interpretation of what we're finding. And we know this to be true. Landscapes are changed by humans, right? Soil chemistry, water chemistry is changed by events in the past. And we have to acknowledge those events and see how it informs our science today. What does a place mean to you? An example, this is Mount Vernon, George Washington's home. A lot of field trips happen there. If you're a Native student and you go there, what does this place mean to you? Dispossession of land, loss of culture, loss of language, death. If you're African American, what does this place mean to you? And I can tell you, when you first walk in here, you're shown a film about the slave history of this place and how the slaves were happy. That's a film that you'd see when you walk in here. I can guarantee you that's not true. No one was happy being a slave. What does this place mean when you bring a student there? Okay? We have to think about where we bring our students and what that place means to them, to have a connection to the science that they're doing. Identity that helps develop their identity as a scientist, allowing them to have a whole identity, however they identify. We can't pick and choose who we are, and we should not demand that of our students. And belonging. I run internship programs, and a lot of the students come in and want to quit their internship. I don't feel like I belong there. No one looks like me. I can't identify with anybody. I'm made to feel like I shouldn't be here. My answer on the bottom is a language map of Alaska. On the other side is a regional cultural map. It's all native land. No matter where you are, you're on native land in this country. So I tell our students, remember that. When you're made to feel like you don't belong, no, you were on Indigenous land. You were the manifestation of a dream. You are the survivor of ethnocide. You're here occupying the space for a reason. Stay focused, stay centered, and find that mentor who will help you and advocate for you. You are always on native land. You belong where you are. How often do we tell our students that? No one ever told me that. And security. So security falls into two spaces. Once we go through place, identity, and belonging, we have this emotional security, right? I'm safe in this space. I'm going to stay in this program. I'm going to get this degree. The other part is when we do field work. Where are we taking our students? How are we getting to where we're taking our students? This is a Southern poverty, excuse me, lost in our map. All the white dots are hate groups in the United States. So do we look at this when we take students out and know where we're dropping them off and doing field work for physical security? Likely not. We have to think about these things, where we're taking our students. How do they feel? How do they belong? How do we connect and make our science better and our students' experiences better? So that's the background of the research I do, looking at geoscience, diversity in science, and how do we change the field so that our students, all of our students, benefit. So I'll tell you a little bit of traditional knowledge here, and then I'm going to talk about how we merge these together. In the beginning, there was no moon or stars. At night, Raven, the most powerful being, made all of the animals. He made all living creatures, that they were living in darkness because he had not made the sun, moon, or stars. One day, Raven learned that there was a chief living on the banks of the Nass River who was in possession of the sun, moon, and stars, and he had them stored in cedar boxes that were nested in one another. And he asked the chief to show him the sun, moon, and stars. No. He asked every day, no, 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 no. So Raven, being a trickster, knew that he has to trick chief and the villagers to get to the sun, moon, and stars. and to steal this treasure. So he turned himself into a hemlock needle and he fell into a glass of water. And the chief's daughter drank that glass of water, swallowed the hemlock needle, and became pregnant with a son. She gave birth to a boy, and the chief loved Raven so much he would give him anything he wanted. So what do you think he asked for? He asked for the stars and moon. Once he got the box, he opened it up, and so the houses had little smoke holes in the ceiling for fire. He threw the sun and moon through the roof. And they scattered across the sky, giving us light at night. He did the same with the sun, and he did the same with water. Stole the water. When he stole the water, he dropped a drop from his beak, and it flowed away and made the Chilkat River. He dropped another drop, and it flowed away again. It dried up, and their minds were sick. It was fatigue, and my mind is sick, and something's wrong. And the third time he dropped the water, he bent it into a sickle so it wouldn't flow away. If we deconstruct traditional stories, what do we start to see? We talk about the formation of rivers and the knowledge of fresh and salt water. My mind is sick because there's a drought. So this is a reference to a climate impact 100 years ago and the stress of food security. Stories were developed with intention. Words were not wasted because they had to pass on knowledge. Our disservice is calling them stories and not knowledge transfer. On the last one, the third drop that he bent into a circle is talking about the water cycle. The knowledge 100 years ago or longer when this story was developed of the water cycle, that there was a cycle to water transport and transfer of energy and heat around the planet. So we start deconstructing these. And so now how do we merge them together? To look at, this is going to take a while because there's a lot of animation. How do we look at traditional knowledge? So if we imagine this is red cedar woven, in each square is a plate. In each plate is chemistry, biology, social science, spirituality, all together in one idea and concept. That's traditional knowledge. When we move our students into a Western science, Western knowledge, it's compartmentalized and fragmented. Not saying it's right or wrong, it's just different, right? So we have to teach our students, all of our students and ourselves, how do we tie these together? Science is about discovery, investigating. How are we as scientists to completely disregard our knowledge system because we don't like it? Can you throw data out? Usually frowned on. But if it's traditional knowledge, I can throw it out. Not really, because it informs your science. So if we tie these together, we teach our students, oh, shoot. Okay. We start having these critical thinking skills developed in students. So we have to connect, and the bidirectional shows that one science informs another. Do you go into chemistry pretending physics doesn't exist? No, it informs the other. So they're all connected. If we teach our traditional knowledge with Western science, then we have this full holistic system. Understanding that traditional knowledge is regionally developed and tells you about that region and the history of that region and locality. That allows us to re-envision what our water cycle looks like, tying in cultural ways of knowing. We know when it rains, fish spawn. Okay? We know when it doesn't rain, fish go away. And then we know that there's evaporation, precipitation. We understand and we tie these two together. A few things to pay attention, though, is respect for intellectual property of knowledge. Acknowledgement that that system was created tens of thousands of years ago and has been valid ever since it was created. So recognizing early in my academic career that I needed a safe space to be a Haida scientist. And how do I use these two knowledge systems together when we hear the assumption of the hierarchy between traditional knowledge and Western science? two distinctive knowledge systems created differently by different people, but defined with asset or deficit-based language. Asset-based language for Western science, deficit language for traditional knowledge. Why? Do we ever stop and ask why? Why is this being defined this way? What does it really mean? Do we stop and try to investigate that? So all of that together gets us to the Indigenous Geoscience community. So we put this together with Daryl Reno, Vernon Morris, Aradhana Tripathi, and Judy Brown Clark. And we talk about Indigenous as people who were in place from another place, not just native, Indigenous. What are we Indigenous to? Where is the land we're from? Okay, we're trying to be inclusive. And can we occupy a space together to use our knowledge systems to enrich one another's lives and our own science? So the structure, it's like weaving sweetgrass together. We have 3 strands, bringing together these diverse Indigenous communities to provide a secure space to collaborate, create knowledge systems, share knowledge systems, looking at not only the individual. When I introduced myself, I told you who my family and community were, because I'm not an individual. I am part of my family. What I do represents my family. And if I mess up, they'll let me know. And my community will let me know. We're all connected. Community. And then how we transition into academic or professional space as an individual, but as a community member as well. In a space where people understand what we're talking about when we say, I'm a community member and I have to do X, Y, and Z to do this project. We look a little closer at that braid. Each strand in that braid is made of several smaller strands. And there's purpose to those. The Indigenous Geoscience community structure, we are guided by a council of elders. So we have conferences, we're going to have meetings at different conferences because we want to get our students to these conferences and transition them into conferences, national conferences as a cohort. Because then there's security, right? You're moving into a conference with someone you know or have met or feel secure with. Each place we have a conference, we're going to invite elders from that place, from their land, to advise us on how do we teach and proceed according to their protocol. I'm a Haida woman. I only know my Haida culture. I only have the authority to talk about my Haida culture as given permission by my elders. I can't speak on any other land. It's not my place. If we invite them in to guide us, they're our first strand. Next is our advisory board. We have 10 scientists, diverse scientists, racially diverse, and discipline diverse. Different academic levels from students, undergrad students, to late-term faculty, right? They all have a different experience. They all have a different perspective, and they inform how we proceed with what we want to do. How do we best help our students? How do we best help our faculty? What is needed? And then the leadership team. Our job is to execute, what we're told. We want to have a conference here. We want to do X, Y, and Z. How do we do it? And what is the protocol to do that? That's how we operate and how we want to proceed with this project. The purpose is to create safe spaces for cross-cultural knowledge exchange. To me, it's extremely fascinating to talk to someone from Lake Superior on how they interact with their water systems and how it's so similar to what we do or how it's different, because it's a completely different environment, right? How do they manage their fish population? I think it's interesting when we look at traditional stories of how they relay their knowledge. We want a space for that. We can help one another by doing that. How do we couple traditional knowledge and Western science? This is one of the curriculum that we created. We take a traditional story, we deconstruct it like we walk through, and we create lesson plans for kindergarten through 12th grade. They get the same story every year, but a different science lesson. So as they move through school, they see the different parts of science reflected in these stories. We have to meet our students where they are, right? They know our traditional stories. You grew up knowing things about your family. You had experiences. What if we taught you using your experiences? Wouldn't it be so much more fascinating? Who liked being in calculus and not knowing why the heck you were learning it? Until you got into geology and went, oh, there it is, that's why. It would have been so much nicer to teach them together, right? That was my experience. Professional development for students. We need to teach our students at an early age how to engage with the public, how to engage with our communities, how to engage in academia in a respectful, ethical way, and how to take constructive criticism in a good way. Okay? Developing relationships with their tribes and with elders. Providing mentorship from allies and community members. And sharing our research and best practices with the broader academic community. Okay? We want our faculty to engage with us. We want to engage with faculty. We want to engage with students. But we want to do it where you meet us where we are, and we meet you where you are. So we provide training and workshops for that. Foundational knowledge. And fostering allyships to provide that knowledge. We work with funding agencies as well, because they want to have best practices in place as well. Okay? We work across this whole spectrum and try to provide opportunities for our students to go to NSF with us, to meet a program officer, and realize they're not really scary people, they're just a human too. All right? But who gets that experience of doing that? We don't often get that opportunity. So we want to provide all the opportunities we can for our students. So I told you about the deficit language around our traditional knowledge systems. 2 weeks ago, I got the honor of having an artist who travels the country painting murals of diverse women in science. And she contacted me and said, I want to paint a mural of your science. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, right, whatever. Sure. And then in July, she sent me am I hitting something or? Oh, shoot, sorry. Okay, I won't touch it again. She sent me the proof in July, and it just finished. It's in Seattle, a 30-foot by 40-foot mural depicting Haida women sharing, I didn't touch it that time, sharing traditional knowledge, air, land, and water women, eagle and raven, those are two moieties. Samaflastas, fish eggs. That's the one thing I asked to depict is my clan. So when my family sees this, they know that this is their family representing who we are. This is our first, we brought 50 students to this and community members. There's two parts here. For our students, it's the first time they've seen traditional knowledge depicted publicly in a positive way. First time. The first time our elders have seen it too. And our elder that came was 94 years old, young, 94 years old. The first time, when she talks about education, she talks about having scars on her legs from being kicked in boarding school. We want to empower our youth. We want to heal our elders. And we want to present education as a positive thing, not a negative thing. We can go back home and do things we were never able to do before with us education, with these two knowledge systems together. So it was a beautiful thing to bring our elders and just watch their face when they first saw it. And we got to put our language on it. We have one fluent Haida speaker, one. So our language being public and displayed this way was, it was amazing. It was strange and surreal. And to see their face when they saw it, it's not something they ever thought they would see. It's not something I ever thought we would see. So we're reclaiming space. And we're able to start turning these negative narratives into something positive, and by working together with other communities. And that's what we want to do. We need to acknowledge each other's strengths, right? And help each other where we're weak. Not tear each other down where we're weak, but help each other and build each other up. We're going to have 2 more, if not 3, right, Daryl? Meetings next October at the ACES conference in Palm Springs, California. It's going to be dreadful there. I don't know if anybody wants to go. We also provide travel for students to go to these conferences. We pay their registration, we pay their lodging, for their food. We want them at these conferences. We want to help transition them in to these conferences. And then the other one is going to be at the Geological Society of America in Denver. We had our first meeting at ACES, 3 weeks ago here in Phoenix. We had a small dinner because of COVID. But we had our first meeting. It was exciting, nonetheless. Some of the other opportunities, excuse me, other opportunities, I have run a Indigenous internship program where students learn about traditional knowledge, science, and policy. We do training with faculty through a program called Voices. Our first workshop is going to be in New Orleans at AGU this December. With that, I want to acknowledge these are the elders I've worked with. They have all moved on. We've passed. But Hawadanat Alagan, thank them so much for the knowledge that they've shared, the love and support and guidance that they gave throughout my career, throughout my youth. And thanks to the community members who allow us to work in our community and use our knowledge systems and to add to our knowledge systems. So with that, I'll say Hawa and thank you so much. Any questions? Yeah, I'm done.
Oop, there we go. Great. Well, thank you very much. So we have time for questions, plenty of time. So we'll start here.
I'll try, oh my gosh, that's loud. I'll try not to take too long, but there's just some context behind my question. So I work, oh my gosh. Rick, help. Oh, okay, bye, Rick. So I work with a nonprofit and helping to develop, oh, hello? Is it, okay, cool, yeah, better. I work with a nonprofit here in Arizona to help develop educational materials that center on outdoor education and STEM or STEAM, whichever. And in the thing I'm mainly working on, it involves like Arizona. And I'm wanting to really include Indigenous perspectives and such, but I'm not quite sure where to start and who to approach for that. So I guess for anyone in a similar situation, what's the best way to initiate that sort of process and also make sure that who you're talking to is properly compensated?
Yeah, great question. The hardest question in the world. How do we do this? So we build relationships with one another, right? We build relationships with communities, and likely the community you want to work with already has someone they're working with that you can engage with. And they can advocate to bring you in so that you can tell them what you're doing and how you want to help. Keep in mind, tribes can say no, and it's nothing personal, okay? Sometimes there's fatigue, there's help fatigue. So, but I would find an advocate. If you know someone or find someone, I'm not sure the layout of the campus, Daryl, if there's an American Indian Studies Department or Indigenous Center that you could go to and get some connections. Okay, so there's the Office of American Indian Affairs. So I would reach out there and just let them know what you want to do because they could give you suggestions of who to contact. Keep in mind, when you work with a tribal nation, you need to go through the tribal government. Okay, there's IRB, Internal Review Board processes. Make sure you're aware of those and how to navigate those spaces correctly because you want to work with the tribe to develop the project. The community member cannot give you access to a tribe. You have to go through tribal leadership. And tribes are laid out very differently. Some have presidents, some have chiefs, tribal councils, elders councils. So just do some research on that tribe and find out what their structure is and then get to the right contact. And you can do a cold call, an email. They have an education person listed. Email them what you want to do and or say, how can I help you? And that is a way to make that contact. So I would start there. And there are some good papers out too. I can share them somehow. I don't know who I would send them to on traditional knowledge, using traditional knowledge systems in an ethical and respectful way. There's a couple of really good papers and protocol on how to do that. Keep in mind, very broad, doesn't apply to every nation. but it's a good framework to start with. And then just ask. It's okay to ask. Like, I don't know what to do with this. Can I use this? Or do you want me to not use it? Give that opportunity. We often don't get that opportunity. And sometimes we don't know to ask. We don't know to ask, what are you going to do with this knowledge? So just ask. And it's okay. It's okay to ask. Don't be afraid to do that. Does that help?
Other questions in the room? We have a few online. Why don't we go to those? So one question is, how often do you find that traditional stories have very similar elements in other tribes?
Well, I'm still learning my own stories and culture. We all have creation stories, right? We all have stories of bringing fire and bringing light. I don't know a lot of them from other cultures. I'm still learning mine. I am the first generation removed from boarding school in my family. So that knowledge was lost to me in my youth. So I'm just now reclaiming that. So I spend a lot of my energy on that. I love to learn about it from other communities because we see this commonality. But I don't learn a lot. I like to hear the stories, but it's hard to do that when I'm focused on another knowledge system intently.
All right. Other questions in the room? We have more online. All right. Have you heard of or know of any similar opportunities or programs in the works to utilize traditional knowledge for teaching astronomy in Indigenous spaces?
Oh, I work with someone who does that. Jim Rock at University of Minnesota, Duluth in Twin Cities, does astronomy and traditional knowledge. And I can provide that information to you to send out if you want, or to whoever would
sure,
forward
I can probably circulate that. Although the
and there's several other
the person who asked the
people.
question was anonymous, so let ask to
Okay.
that person, send me an email and I will connect you with, or send Professor Smythe an email.
And there's several people that do that type of work, but I know Jim.
All right. Are there other questions in the room? You, Steve?
Wendy, I'll just ask what level of online presence do you anticipate the IGC will have? What sorts of things will you want to do given the...
We're getting there. We have been so delayed because of COVID, we are now at the phase of trying to discuss, Daryl and I and the rest of our leadership team, how do we proceed and execute this grant when we can't be in person? And that is what we're in the planning stages of doing. So to be determined.
Are there other
And we'll
questions?
post that on the website too. The postcards were handed out with the QR code. We'll post that information as it, yeah.
So this question, it's really more an opening maybe for you to provide some commentary. So as someone who was born in Seattle and has seen the tribe slowly disappearing, your presentation is very heartening to see. Do you believe that this will help the different tribes have a resurgence? That's really asking again about other.
That is what I hope is the intent with the mural, that we will start to be able to work with other tribes and empower one another to publicly display our knowledge systems without fear. Because there's fear associated with it, no doubt, no doubt. But how do we move forward and occupy space in a positive way and work with other nations? And so anytime someone comes to me, I try to connect them to people I know. What we are going to do is do a response mural to the one that was done. This was someone's vision of who we are. I have to every elder that came out there was like, that's not Haida. And I was like, I know, we're dark, yeah. But that's someone's vision of who we are. And we had to take a step back and respect that. That's how someone saw our knowledge. And it's really beautiful once we realize that's how someone sees us. So I'm like, ooh, hey, you know. It was interesting. So we're going to do a response mural using the color scheme of our tribes and working with the Duwamish people in Seattle and the other tribes in the region to do a response mural on their land using their knowledge system. This is a Haida-inspired mural on the indigenous land of another tribal community. So we requested funds to do a response from the land that we're occupying there. So we're still going to move forward with a second mural.
Okay, there's another very practical question. Will there be an online component to your workshop of voices at AGU?
That one there will not be, but we are going to do one in next fall. So we have 3 workshops. So we have AGU, we have one in DC, one in Duluth, one in Alaska, and then in the fall, we'll do one online because we've had a lot of requests for that. So that will be pending as well. I can, we do have a website for voice I can share, or there's a QR code. If you do the QR code, it'll take you to that website for voices, and we'll list every workshop that we do.
All right. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, if not, let's thank. Oh, there's one. I didn't see it. Sorry. Go for it. Question 2.
Hopefully this comes out the right way. I didn't finish writing it all out, but I guess like what are common things that are shown by like non-Indigenous folk that has good intention, but is actually damaging to Indigenous folks in their communities?
Not following protocol, not knowing protocol, not knowing who we are. Know who you're talking to, right? Just look them up, look at some of the protocol and how to interact. Acknowledge the elders. Like that's the main part of our protocol. Be respectful. Don't walk in and tell me all your degrees. We don't want to know. They don't want to know. They're trying to do some other things in the community. And as in the beginning, when I told you who I was in Hodkill, I'm not supposed to tell you that. Someone else is supposed to say it, but Daryl doesn't speak Haida and I couldn't teach him overnight. So I did it in Haida and he did it in English. So there's a part of humility. Walk in with humility. And that is a core cultural value. Humility, yachtang, respect. I would say start there, knowing protocol. And when you're told you're breaking protocol, listen. Don't get offended. Listen and fix it. Right? Not hard to do, but I cannot tell you how many people break protocol and get offended when they're told. I don't want to have a conflict with anyone. I'm doing my own thing, but it is our cultural responsibility to speak up when we see something. So acknowledging that duality to our identity. We work in a colonized space. We have an expectation as a student, a postdoc, early career faculty to our behavior, right? Don't argue. Keep your head down. Be quiet. I have cultural responsibility as well. As a Haida woman, as a clan leader, to speak up, to say something. Those worlds don't always go together. When someone speaks up, they're not being disrespectful. They're abiding by their cultural responsibility. So know that. A lot of people get really offended by that. No one's trying to offend anyone. We're just trying to abide by protocol. I would just say start there.
Thanks. Are there any other questions online? Oh, there's a question here.
There we go. Okay. My question is, being here today, what would you like us to know and take away from your your discussion with us and your teaching, speaking to a group of students, a group of faculty? What can we do and what should we do with this knowledge?
Think about your intent in science. Why are you here? Are you here to learn something and make the world different? Are you here to learn one way of knowing the world? Or do you want to know multiple so that you can perceive, develop your critical thinking skills, see a problem a different way, engage with the world in a different way? It's beautiful to see the world through different people's eyes. It's fascinating. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to change how you teach your students. Students learn in different ways. Indigenous students learn in different ways. We transmit knowledge differently. Don't be afraid to engage with other communities and teach those lessons in your class. That's what I'd say. It can enrich your life and your research and your students as well.
All right, are there any more questions? Well, I think humility and respect are values that we can safely say are badly needed in the society at large. So thank you for that. And with humility and respect, thank you very much for a really enlightening presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much.